You won't see Elon Musk in Davos this year. He says it's boring on Twitter, which he now owns. Twitter, which is still bleeding money. Same big losses for his electric car maker, Tesla. But it would take a lot more for the billionaire to go broke. Fact is, in today's world, tech titans seem a little unbreakable, even when the likes of Musk face a lawsuit for allegedly manipulating Tesla's share price. The EU, represented at this week's World Economic Forum by many commissioners, including the Commission president, acknowledges how the digital age has concentrated outsized wealth and political power in the hands of a happy few that are able to exploit global taxation loopholes and skirt state regulations that have been eroded over decades. We'll be asking about an inequality gap that accelerated when the world went online during the COVID pandemic, and whether you can blame it on big tech. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at inequality in the digital age. Joining us is Quentin Parinello, Senior Policy Officer on Tax Justice and Inequalities at Oxfam France. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
We want to welcome as well entrepreneur Tariq Krim. You are working on something called Polite.
Yes.
What is that?
It's about building tech with good manners after like a decade of, problems, trying to figure out what can we do to make it better.
And more civility, and it would certainly be welcome. Many thanks for that. Charline Biondi, researcher at Columbia University Sciences Po. You're the author in French of Decoding an Alternative History, I guess you could say, of the digital age?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Of technology.
Of technology, okay. Of internet technology. Exactly. Also with the Shane Valley Senior Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations think tank. Welcome. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Well, it goes as well. Joining us, by the way, from Davos is our own Kate Moody, who is there throughout the week. And there's a call, Kate, that's been thrown your way for years. Billionaires like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have been telling governments, tax us more. Now comes a reminder from millionaires to, well, some of the other millionaires gathered where you are in that Swiss resort. Alison Sargent explains.
Tax us and tax us now. The plea of more than 200 millionaires in an open letter addressed to world leaders and other members of the global elite gathered in Davos.
The current lack of action is gravely concerning. A meeting of the global elite in Davos to discuss cooperation in a fragmented world is pointless if you aren't challenging the root cause of division. Now is the time to tackle extreme wealth. Now is the time to tax the ultra-rich.
The signatories include American actor Mark Ruffalo, Abigail and Tim Disney, a grandniece and nephew of the famed American producer, and Danish-Iranian entrepreneur Jafar Shalchi. While most come from the US and the UK, 13 countries are represented, including France. Still, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire saw the letter as an opportunity to brag about his country's tax system.
They're welcome here. They'll have the right to one of the highest tax rates in any developed country. Let me remind you that if you're a millionaire in France, you have a marginal tax rate at 45%. So come to France. Believe me, we know how to tax you.
But the so-called patriotic millionaires behind the letter would say that's not enough. In a report co-published with Oxfam and other groups, they note that a wealth tax ranging from 2 to 5% on the world's millionaires and billionaires would raise over $2.5 trillion annually, enough to lift over 2 billion people out of poverty and provide universal health care for all citizens of low and middle-income countries. In France, such an additional tax would raise enough to plug the retirement deficit, making the government's controversial reform unnecessary.
Yeah, Oxfam puts out a report on inequality for every World Economic Forum. This year's report, Kate Moody, particularly striking, what with 2/3 of all the world's wealth since 2020 captured by the richest 1% of the planet.
Yeah, it used to be a rhythm of more like half of the new wealth going to that 1%, still a pretty extraordinary figure. But in the last 2 years, that has increased now to 2/3. That was the really stark warning from the Oxfam, that latest Oxfam report, which was entitled Survival of the Richest. It's one of the sort of contradictions, if you will, of Davos, that report on inequality is released every year on the opening day of the World Economic Forum, which gathers, as we've discussed, some of the richest people in the world, the political and business elite. On that first day, as Oxfam released the report, I caught up with Oxfam's director, Gabriella Boucher, to get her reaction. Take a listen.
This is shocking and also shameful, and it means that inequality and the difference is accumulating and it's accelerating. In the last 10 years, it was half and half, 1% and 99, which was already extreme, but now it's almost double. The 1% has almost double new wealth of the 99%.
Quentin Parinello, why? Why is there this acceleration of this inequality gap?
So there are two things that are striking in the report. As Gabriela said, there's an acceleration of the concentration of extreme wealth. And this is mainly because during the last 2 years, there was a huge injection of liquidity in financial markets, and that liquidity was captured by billionaires. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, which is
Captured
also
like billionaires, kind of like when you had the quantitative easing during the financial crisis,
Absolutely.
The banks took the money.
Absolutely. So the liquidity injected into financial markets drove up the share prices, and since billionaires in financial markets own most of the shares, their fortune, their wealth went up. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, which is rather new as well, is that we're seeing an increase in extreme poverty. What we've seen over the past few years, and Kate said it, we've released that report. It's been the 10th edition. We've released the report for 10 years now. And what we've seen is that an increase in extreme wealth and a sort of stable level of extreme poverty, except in sub-Saharan Africa. This year is different. This year we're seeing tens of millions of new people pushed into extreme poverty.
Is it because of COVID and the slowdown in trade and lockdowns, or is it what else? What else could be the factors?
These poly crises, as we say in the report, this succession of crises, COVID, the climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, it's basically pushing a lot of people below the level of poverty, because these are the people, they don't have good social protection. They live in countries with poor healthcare, and they're vulnerable to crisis. They don't have the right lifeline. So what we're saying is that for the past 10 years, we've seen an accumulation of wealth at the top and not enough money invested into safety nets, into social protections. And that has created vulnerability for a lot of people. And unfortunately, we know this is not the last crisis we're going to face. And what we're asking right now, of course, is to rebalance the economy and make sure we build safety nets. And for that, we need funding. And for that, we need to make sure that the rich pay their fair share.
The rich pay their taxes. Shane Valley, when you see this petition, the 200 millionaires, again, it's not the first time we've had this tax us please mantra from very rich people. What was your reaction?
No, I think it's good to see that people who have accumulated wealth feel also that the tax system is unequal. I would stress the fact that we've talked a lot about personal wealth here and wealth tax on a personal level, but I think there is a real issue around corporate taxation as well. And the fact that we have these concentration of wealth is also due to the fact that we have a corporate tax system at the global level that has allowed pervasive tax evasion. And Europe, for that matter, likes to pride itself for being a role model, but hasn't been. Europe has been a global platform for tax evasion for international, in particular for American corporates, through affiliation to Ireland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands. So there's been a very important shift in 2021 with an OECD agreement to create a minimum level of corporate taxation at the global level of 15%, but it's still a very low level. And this agreement, which has been held back for many years, is still not implemented entirely today. So I think we need to ask the question of taxing wealth of millionaires and billionaires, but we also need to raise the question of corporate taxation, which is critical at the global level, but in Europe in particular.
Just to be clear on this, Kate Moody, if it was a minimum of 15%, I believe the executive director of Oxfam was telling you how that would still be lower than what it is today on average worldwide.
Yeah, in a lot of countries, it really isn't going to make much of a difference because that 15% is something that was watered down. It was, there were years of discussion on what that minimum rate would be. 15% was the absolute minimum that could be agreed on. A lot of the experts, a lot of the tax experts in particular that I've spoken to on this issue over the last few months have said that actually when it comes down to it, that announcement, sure, it sounds great, there's finally this international agreement, but concretely on the ground and for governments, that 15% isn't going to be enough to make much of a difference.
Lots of reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. Panya on Twitter says, Oxfam has said this for more than 20 years at many forums. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. I think it's time for NGOs to stop going to places like the World Economic Forum because it's not fixed anything. What do you say to that, Quentin?
Well, first of all, it's been 10 years, but it's long. I agree with that tweet. What we're saying is that inequality it's the result of political decisions, right? And what we've seen over the past decade, but actually over the past 40 years, is decreasing taxes on the top 1%. So it's no surprise that the share, the share of wealth captured by the top 1% is increasing. It's the result of political decisions. And what we're asking, and I think the real question that we should ask is why governments are not pushing for wealth taxes. Some of them are, and we're actually showing good examples in the report. Chile, Argentina, Colombia. Colombia just announced that they want to push for an initiative at Latin American level on corporate taxation, but also on wealth taxation. So there are good examples, but most of the countries are still trapped in an old ideology that cutting down taxes for the richest will trickle down of the rest of the population, which actually has not proved right.
Tariq Krim, when you wore a younger man's clothes, there was this promise that the age of the internet would offer more opportunity to everyone, would be somehow a great equalizer. Did you think that in those days?
Yes, I did. And I think in some ways it actually happened. We have so many access to so many services that used to be quite expensive in the past. But one of the things and one of the reasons we're discussing about this question of, inequality is that technology has absorbed the entire economy. It started with the mail, then the culture, now everything is streamed, so the media industry has been also absorbed. Even now, military is part of the tech consortium. And the problem is the moment that it goes through this technological world, then it's easy to manipulate because we're talking about bits, and it's easy to actually capture the value and put it in safe havens and not having taxable. That's been a problem.
It's easier than before.
It's easier, and it's been done for ages. Think about now, every time a country is using cloud services or advertising, part of that money is going pretty much away, and it's stored in all these tax havens. And that's the model. I mean, it's the business model of the internet, to capture all that data, all that transaction, and make it easy to make billions of dollars are stored right now. For example, a company like Apple would rather lose money than putting money back in the US. So you have this safe haven. I think it's about maybe $1 trillion stored in tax havens that are all these big tech owns. And basically what they do every day is capturing part of that money and putting it there.
So Quentin Parrigno's suggestion that to fix this, you need to tax corporations more. Shaheen Valley was talking about it. Is that the solution? Is that going to work?
Well, we're trying, but I think one of the problems we have with technology is the monopolies. We have 5 to 10 companies that basically control everything. In the past, we used to have hundreds of companies who used to pay their fair share of taxes in the US, in Europe. So one of the problems we have with regulation is, of course, trying to see how we can tax better and figuring out a better way to do that, but also how we can open up the market. One of the main problems today is the market is basically controlled by 10 companies. I could say even more, 10 individuals who control these companies.
So you're saying break up the likes of Google, Amazon?
This is one of the things, but also making sure that other companies can actually thrive. Right now, if you're a big major company in the media, you cannot compete against Disney or Netflix or Amazon. We need to figure out ways to reopen the market. I think the competition is completely stalled. We are back to an era, you remember probably, when the phone industry in the US was controlled by one company, and when it was breaking up. And I think it is time also to reopen the market.
They have a mighty bullhorn, these tech companies, especially the ones who control social media, and they don't like paying a lot of tax. People like Elon Musk consider themselves free speech libertarians, but they also talk about how much tax they pay. Is it going to be possible to do what Tariq says? Who's got the upper hand in this battle for a fairer playing field?
Well, I think we have in the last years, we've reached a kind of breaking point of awareness where these same technologies that used to be presented as the emblem of democratic values and liberties are now considered a threat to even human rights, according to the UN report on AI. And so the discourse radically shifted in a very short period of time. I mean, until maybe even 6 years ago, the dominant discourse was that you had to let innovators, such as Elon Musk, innovate for the greater good. And then things happened, it started with fake news, Cambridge Analytica. We started realizing that all these data, as Tariq said, were very easy and at a very low cost being weaponized potentially against us. Then other researchers, such as Kate Crawford, came up with extensive research on the ecological cost of technology. And suddenly people agreed that these things need to be regulated. And I think today there's a large consensus, even from industry players, that technology and their leaders, the industry and their leaders are going to be regulated.
Have we reached a tipping point? Because again, we've heard these kinds of calls now for several years.
Well, I think we've reached the tipping point where things are starting to move, and in some areas they're moving faster than others. I mean, you look at the regulatory activity right now surrounding crypto, it's moving fast, and it's definitely going to move. And at least, well, what makes me optimistic is that there is now this awareness, even from industry players, right? You even have people working at Google, Facebook, that are actually calling for regulators to regulate. 10 years ago, tech people such as Edward Snowden were strongly against the state mingling with technology and technological progress. Now, the problem that we're having is that politics is always slow compared to technology. And so there's this issue of technology, the disruptions that is produced by new technology and innovations is not only limited to new practices and new markets, it's also a policy disruption. And so it leaves politicians and governments forced to react after the harm, so to speak, has been done, right? And so you have, for example, in Paris, the law against Airbnb took 10 years to manifest. And in 10 years, the city has been changed. I mean, Airbnb has changed the face of the city, and so did Uber, and so did, electric scooters. But that again, I mean, if you take a historical perspective, I think this is not so new in the history of liberal modern democracies. And I think the awareness that we've gained from all these tech scandals is just reminding us that once again, politics is going to have to govern a new area, just like Tariq was saying. And 19th century, when Marx was criticizing the working conditions, he was actually calling for politics to take over. To start governing the economy, because it was not done. 20th century, everybody agrees that the economy should be governed by politics. And then, but
he also believed in technology. Karl Marx, in the German ideology, talks about hunting in the morning, fishing in the afternoon, and
right.
I forget what it is, contemplating the stars in the evening. But he says that's all thanks to technology will make it possible for us to live in that utopian world that he was dreaming.
Right, and he thought that if the workers could actually get their hands on a technological means of production, then that would be the true revolution, once the people has their hands on the machine rather than the bourgeois capitalists. That was Marx's thought. But to come back to my initial argument, once the democracy regulates the economy, it can solve its problem and its abuses with the workplace. The same thing happened with I don't know, medicine and education. And I think now we're just realizing that it is time for states and governments to regulate the technological sphere.
Shaheen Valley?
Yeah. I think what's striking is that there is an emerging consensus on competition policy and being more aggressive there. But what I find striking is that there is no political consensus for action on taxation. And it's remarkable because technically there is a majority of people that is suffering from wealth inequality and income inequality, and yet we cannot command a majority pretty much anywhere in the world or any advanced economy for aggressive action on taxation, whether it be on corporations or on individuals. In fact, even the current US administration, which has been fairly left-leaning, in particular on these issues of competition policy against tech giants, has basically done nothing when it comes to taxation, or so very little. This current government in France as well, maybe, quite aggressive in building an industrial policy, maybe quite aggressive in, fighting against the domination of tech giants, but won't touch taxation. And so I find that very ironic. And, we've been to places of extreme wealth inequality in the past. If you think of the 1920s, the response to that was, a large amount of taxation, to some extent confiscatory taxation in the post-war era.
But we heard that clip in that report at the outset, Shaheen, of the French finance minister effectively playing to stereotypes by saying, come to France, to those millionaires, we'll tax you over here.
Yeah, but that's also an implicit way of saying that, he's not considering any more than what we have at the moment. In fact, this government has reduced taxation on the wealthiest in the last 5 years.
Kate Moody?
Yeah, just wanted to weigh in there because one of the arguments that I've heard here in Davos when we're talking about this issue of corporate taxation, in particular in reference to what Oxfam has been calling for, is that there does seem to be the possibility of political consensus when it really matters. And the people that I were talking to were actually pointing to the windfall tax that's been imposed on energy giants as they've been reaping these record profits during the energy crisis. The European Union has agreed to impose, I believe it's about a 33% tax on those windfall profits during this particular period. And what I've been hearing is that people think that, look, if we can do this during a time of crisis in the energy sector, why can't we get that political will together in another situation? Because this is a crisis. It's a crisis in the tech world. It's a crisis that's affecting all kinds of corporations, as we've been discussing. So it's just one point that people are looking at in this particular time of crisis. They say, hang on a minute, maybe there is something that we can do. It just needs to be enacted.
It just needs to be enacted. And we've seen a lot of turmoil. We've seen mostly it's been in things like food and energy, where we've seen those mega profits in the past year. But you were saying earlier, Tariq Karim, that a lot of it has been, since COVID began, in the tech sector itself.
Yeah, what's interesting is when the pandemic started, and I think one of the reasons we should also acknowledge the fact that one of the reasons the US is being very kind to the big tech, it's right now with a war with Ukraine, with the pandemics, big tech was also the architecture of how we operate in the world. So,
and we're realizing with the war in Ukraine how dependent Ukraine and its allies are on big tech. In fact, Elon Musk, with his Starlink satellite system, has single-handedly perhaps thwarted Vladimir Putin to a degree. He's more powerful than many armies.
But you could say, so he says, but you could say as well that the Ukraine infrastructure has been protected by Microsoft. So they've been very forward-thinking, working on securing the infrastructure. And in some ways, what we've seen with the pandemic is the inflation of needs. Also, you were talking about quantitative easing, the fact that there was basically free money on the market for the last 10, 15 years since the last crisis. So it's very easy to consolidate, to create large infrastructures. And now what we're seeing is with COVID being almost over, at least in the US, we started to see a crisis in the tech where people are starting to either letting people go or restructuring. It's also due to the fact that we're going back to a normal stage. In the meantime, in non-tech industries in the US, we're lacking workers. And non-specific tech knowledge workers.
Yeah, the fortunes are changing for big tech. Jury selection starting in San Francisco Tuesday in the lawsuit brought by Tesla shareholders against Elon Musk. They argue he manipulated the firm's share price by pondering a buyback to take the electric car maker off the stock market. That sent shares up, and then he failed to deliver. That sent shares down. Tesla's value has dropped 25% in the last month alone for a variety of reasons. And just as Facebook's parent company lost its luster since the launch of a virtual reality platform Meta, Elon Musk also accused of overstretching with his purchase of Twitter. I guess if you're going to put a face on the ups and downs of the tech world, it is Elon Musk, because he was considered the world's wealthiest man alongside Jeff Bezos for a while. Now that's no longer the case. But it is one person who has incredible outsized power.
Right. And not only that, but he's also, I think, Elon Musk makes it very easy to put a face on so much more than what he actually is. He's representing the mercenary attitude of so many tech founders of a certain very aggressive side of Silicon Valley culture, and also of late stage capitalism.
He had like in the
this
old,
is what he's embodying.
In the old days, you had people were fans of football players. Now there are people who are fans of the stars, like of people like Elon Musk. Is he a great innovator, or is he just basically a wolf?
I mean, that's hard for me to answer, and also I think it's a little tricky to reduce, a company's success to its founder. I mean, how much work has he actually done at Tesla, or even at Starlink? I mean, he certainly has certain gift in business, and that could be even questionable, when you look at the price at which he bought Twitter. But I think the reason why we're so focused on Elon Musk right now is because he is precisely this kind of he's almost an empty shell. I mean, not an empty shell, but a shell within which we can just pinpoint to everything that has gone rogue with the tech industry and late-stage capitalism. This is why it's so fertile to talk about Elon Musk.
As tech matures, the age of wonderment, and Charlene Biondi, you point at this, is perhaps over. In the 2013 comedy The Intern, Hollywood seems in awe of Silicon Valley. The film feels like an infomercial for Google and its sleek, innovative vibe. And now, after movies like Don't Look Up comes Glass Onion, where Netflix again paints tech gurus as deceitful megalomaniacs. This one played by Edward Norton. There is this feeling. Do you get the sense, Quentin Parinello, that public opinion and is turning against Silicon Valley? And
I think, coming back to the graph that you showed on Tesla's share price, what would have been interested is to show the share prices going back to 2020, because what we're discussing right now is the sort of fallout of Elon Musk's wealth.
Because it went massively up.
It went massively up. He had a wealth of approximately $25 billion before the crisis. His wealth went up like more than 300 billion. He actually was the person that got most out of the crisis. And thanks to that, and thanks to public intervention, that liquidity injection, partly, of course, he got the financial liquidity from the financial surface, basically, to buy out Twitter. So this is also because public intervention, because of the liquidity injection, he got enough to actually go to banks, go to investors and say, hey, look, I have enough to buy out Twitter. So we should also ask ourselves, what do we do in times of crisis, and who do we ask to contribute to pay the bills?
So you're saying banks and regulators are fools?
Well, I mean, the impact of the crisis is that they drove up the wealth of many big billionaires in tech, but not only in tech, because we've seen Bernard Arnault, the richest man on earth. He's not in tech. He's the richest man on earth.
He's a luxury goods magnate. Absolutely.
And he doubled his wealth during the crisis, not because LVMH sold more handbags, but because of liquidity injection. And what that calls for is, do we ask them to actually pay for the bill of the crisis or not? And we've discussed a bit about the evolution of taxation I agree 100% that during the last crisis, the response of public governments was to say, okay, we're going to ask those that actually benefited from the crisis to pay more. What changed is also the way we talk about taxation, the way political elites talk about taxation. We used to have very high marginal tax rates on the wealthy in the US, for instance, during Roosevelt. The difference was that even the president was actually praising taxes as a tool to redistribute wealth, as a tool to diminish wealth concentration. Now, if you listen to Bruno Le Maire, for instance, French finance minister, he's saying, like, okay, people are taxed too much, we need to cut taxes on the richest. So there's a responsibility from the political elite and economic elite to talk about tax, and that would actually help. And interestingly enough, on windfall taxes, and in France again, we've seen countries move forward on windfall taxes. Why was it implemented in France? Because it was not called taxes. Otherwise, our government would not have put forward that proposal, because they're so much trapped in their ideology to be against tax increase that they wouldn't have actually implemented it.
There's a reason for that, of course, Shane Valley, which is the fear that companies will go elsewhere.
Yeah, and this is why I think to a large extent the argument that, more aggressive tax policy can only work if it is a global or at least European, I think is a valid one. The problem is how much energy do we actually put to deliver a European or a global solution? And I think we've seen in the example of the OECD agreement or, more modestly in what we've been able to achieve in Europe, that there's rarely been enough political capital invested in trying to deliver.
We're on the eve of a strike here in France against the government's planned pension reform bill. They say with the population aging, we're not going to have enough money in the system. And people are saying, well, why don't you just tax the rich more?
Yeah. I think, for every, big reform, this question will be raised. Why don't we have a fairer tax system that maybe, allows to make reforms easier for all? So I think that question is live for the pension reform, but will be for others, whether it is unemployment insurance or others. And I think it's a fair question to ask. I'm not sure this is the card we should raise all the time. I think there are reforms that are generally good for the country. I'm not sure this is the case of this one, but there are others that will be. And so the argument that you can always find money elsewhere to avoid a reform, could be used with some caution. Maybe just a quick word on the liquidity and monetary policy that has been referred to and indeed has played an important role in reflating asset prices. I just want to say, I think it's true that this has played a big role in expanding asset prices and therefore in expanding wealth inequality. But I still think that monetary policy response was necessary in the crisis, and not having it would have been more costly for all, including for the not wealthy people.
So, Tariq Karim, at the end of the day, what levels, as you were wishing for earlier, the playing field in tech? Is it the fact that right now you have interest rates rising, so they're not getting that free money they were getting just a couple of years ago? Or is it regulation and the state intervention that Quentin has been pleading for?
I think it's going to be a bit of both. One other thing we have to state is that Europe has also benefited from this amount of money. I mean, if you look at the investment in startups, it's been absolutely enormous compared to over years. But the problem that we have is, you have two types of countries. Countries that dominate with technology, like the US and in some ways China, and people who basically are dominated by technology. And if you're dominated by technology, then you have to pay for clouds, for everything, cloud services, basic technology. And the problem is because we have to pay for this technology instead of building them ourselves, the cost of bearing is much bigger. And this is probably one of the issues we have in Europe.
Charlene Biondi, when you see that this Wednesday in Davos, they had a panel discussion on the Metaverse, right, which hasn't had great press of late. It hasn't worked very well. It either hasn't worked or it's been the people using it have been accused of violence and sexual harassment of other participants. Is the World Economic Forum, in your view, behind the times when they have these kind of panels where they invite the head of Meta, the parent group of Facebook?
Well, the thing is, I believe the metaverse is about much more than what we've seen with Meta's first experiment, meaning Meta has advertised the metaverse as simply this new world of virtual reality. I think the reason why Meta is so interested in looking into the metaverse, even if the first prototype has clearly failed, is because an internet that would be based on blockchain, and this is what I believe the future of the metaverse rests upon, its blockchain technology, could enable the tokenization of almost everything. And by tokenization, I mean transforming any virtual object into an asset that can be sold and commercialized. And this is the reason why, Bernard Arnault, that you just mentioned, and the luxury industry is so interested in NFTs and in blockchain technologies. It's because economically, this is a whole new universe for the tech industry that it might open, thanks to...
So far, blockchain is associated with what increasingly crypto is looking like a Ponzi scheme.
Well, and that again, it would take a longer answer than I think we can give here, but
a whole nother debate.
And a whole other day. But crypto is just one side of blockchain. You can have blockchain without crypto. And at Davos, by the way, there was another panel that was pretty interesting on blockchain and tokenization with other CEOs, where we're seeing a growing interest from traditional financial institutions and just real-world companies wanting to move towards blockchain technology without being exposed to crypto necessarily, just tokenizing what they, traditional bonds and securities. But maybe that's for another conversation.
The acceleration of the change that you describe, it scares a lot of people. It's daunting to see how fast things are changing. And what we're seeing that more and more, Davos is the target of anti-globalization conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories first relayed in chat rooms, then on social media, the Associated Press reporting. We're seeing it being shared by regular Americans. We're seeing it being spread by mainstream media figures right on their primetime news. Kate Moody, you're actually right now witnessing what is a cabal of that's the conspiracy theory surrounding Davos. And again, the internet, social media enables people to relay these conspiracy theories at the speed of light.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I just want to circle back to what we were saying about the metaverse, because the metaverse is present here in Davos in far more ways than just these panel discussions. There is actually what's called a global collaboration village that the World Economic Forum has set up. It has about 80 different partners, including the likes of JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, McKinsey, but also international organizations like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and this collaborative village, which I have to say I've yet to visit. I'm hoping to make it before I have to leave on Friday. It's what these groups see as their vision of the future, of this digital future. So just to be clear, this digital world, it's not just a subject of conversation here. Davos, the World Economic Forum, all the participants here are really trying to bring it to life in a certain degree.
Tariq Karim, should we... We've just spent most of this discussion talking about how difficult it is to regulate the world as it is. Should we be worried about the future? Because it sounds, again, like this is all going very fast.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was invited in Davos in the early days when technology, when Mark Zuckerberg was first coming to Davos. And there was this idea that technology would take the world to a better place. Now, if you think about it, there's three problems exactly at the same time happening. First, since Trump, we haven't fixed social media. It's still not working. Look at what happened in Brazil just a couple of weeks ago. The second thing, with the war in Ukraine, we see the weaponization of the internet. Now, countries are trying to sign off. There's 35 countries in this world trying to say, we're going out of the internet. We're going to do like China, build our own internet. And then you have the problematic of the post-COVID and the deglobalization, where every country is now trying to build their own technology service. Now, we don't want to do anything with China. And in some ways, Davos is trying to say, well, you know what? We still believe in this global world, but in some ways, when you look at how countries are operating, I don't think Davos has much as influence as they used to have 10, 20 years ago on the matter.
Okay, what's the mood like this year? This is the first time that Davos has been back in its usual winter slot.
Yeah, I mean, there was that sort of unusual mid-season meeting back in May, held that way because of the pandemic. The situation is a little bit different here this time around. You know, we've been talking about the theme of this week's meeting, cooperation in a fragmented world, and what that really means is that everything that Davos stands for, everything Davos has always stood for, is under attack. This very system of globalization, international cooperation, sort of schmoozing among the world's elites, they feel that is under attack. We see that in those social media conspiracy theories that you were talking about there. There is certainly a feeling amongst most of the participants here. They're very aware that this meeting is attracting more and more criticism. I was speaking earlier this afternoon. I interviewed the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, and I actually asked her about that. I said, what would you say to people who criticize this and say it's absolutely out of touch, it's unnecessary, it doesn't do anything? And she said, for someone like her who's in a position, at the IMF, she sees everybody she could possibly need to see here in Davos, and that as she walks through the halls, she can grab someone by the arm and say, hey, I need 10 minutes with you, and we can actually sit down and solve a problem. And she said that's something that just can't happen on Zoom. So I'd say here, there's certainly an awareness that the format of Davos may not last forever. The very ethos of it may certainly be under attack, but it's certainly a sort of love-hate relationship with the tech world.
So when you're talking about a fragmented world, Quentin Parinello, Davos, is it a good thing?
There's a lot of marketing in the title, and to me what it shows is that it actually shows the failure of globalization bringing prosperity to all. We've been told that the wave would lift all boats and that give the money to the top 1%, and that would actually help everyone. And that actually has created a fragmented world. And we're seeing a succession of crises, and we know that this is not the last one. If we do not build the good safety nets to actually protect the most vulnerable, that will be a problem. That means that we do need to invest. We do need to make sure that the wealthy contribute to build those safety nets. And we were talking about France and the pension reform. France is not an exception. We've seen 3 out of 4 governments that are planning in the next 5 years to cut spending on education, on health, or on social protection. That represents roughly $7,800 billion. That's a lot. And that actually shows that the governments, they didn't learn the lesson out of the crisis. We do need more safety nets, and we do need to make sure that the people who are at the top, they do contribute to that a bit more.
So you're saying tax the rich rather than make ordinary citizens work longer?
Absolutely, but not just in France. In
All right.
A lot of countries.
Quentin Parinello, priming the pump for Thursday's discussion. Many thanks for that. I want to thank as well Tariq Krim for being with us, Shaheen Valley, Charlene Biondi, Kate Moody in Davos. Her busy week is only halfway over. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.